Warning: this podcast includes graphic material of sexual assault and murder. Viewer discretion is advised.
Elie Wesiel was a writer, activist, and journalist who would go out of his way to help others and to report on atrocities across the world, giving survivors and victims of these atrocities the chance to speak. Elie never wanted anyone to suffer in silence and did his best to spread awareness of ongoing tragic events around the world. Elie knew all too well what it was like to suffer in silence, because Elie Wesiel was a survivor from Auschwitz concentration camp, where he had suffered greatly with his father, while the rest of the world pretended the concentration camps did not exist, in Germany, World War II. Elie Wesiel was born on September 30th, 1928, to a loving Jewish family made up of his mother, Sarah Free, and his father, Shamlo Wesiel. Elie had two older sisters, named Bernice and Hilda. And lastly, Elie had a little sister named Deborah, who was about 7 years old. During Elie's childhood, young Elie was heavily encouraged by his father, Shamlo, to study humanism and literature, which his father could often engage Elie in conversations of said topic. Elie's mother, Sarah, encouraged him to learn about his Jewish heritage and to study Torah, the first 5 readings of the Hebrew Bible. Elie found joy looking after his younger sister, Deborah, whom he cared for deeply. During the years before the official start of World War II, Elie and his Jewish neighborhood would hear gruesome stories about Germans taking Jewish people to camps to be slaughtered or worked to death. Most of these tales were considered rumors at the time. A church pastor of Elie's church actually experienced a number of Germans taking him and a group of Jews to a secluded area where all the adults were shot down into a crowded grave, while the children were used as target practice. The pastor was only able to escape because he managed to fall back from the unsuspecting group of families, unknowingly marching towards their deaths. Despite the pastor's frantic pleas, the adults surrounding Elie didn't fully believe the story, as a new German soldier had recently moved into one of the Jewish homes of the area. The soldier seemed very polite to his host family and was treating the community as his own. As time went on, Germany invaded and took control of Poland, causing more German soldiers to take control of Elie's area. Slowly but surely, more rules were put in place to isolate the Jewish people of Signet. I'm sorry, I probably pronounced that wrong. Such rules included forcing Jewish people of the town to wear the yellow star everywhere they went, along with shutting down their places of worship, shutting down their businesses run by Jewish people, and creating curfews for citizens to follow. Elie's father was not bothered by much of the new rules, and was quoted by Elie in his book Night by saying, "The yellow star? So what? It's not fatal." Time went on, and Elie's neighborhood began to notice neighbors and citizens disappearing on trains, forced out of their homes by German soldiers. Eventually, Elie's family became one of these families and was forced out of their homes onto crowded cattle cars on trains where no one was able to sit or move. 15-year-old Elie and his family watched a few people die in front of them on the train, due to exhaustion and dehydration. One neighbor of Elie's family began screaming that she saw fire and they were all going to die. At first, the crowd of people in the car pitied the woman, as her husband had gone missing before, and she was likely starting to lose her mind. However, the frantic woman continued to scream for hours, causing the crowd to beat her up and gag her to keep the woman quiet, who attempted to try and calm his mother to the best of his ability. After 3 long days in a packed train, Elie and the rest of the passengers were forced out of the humid cattle cars and were brought to Auschwitz concentration camp. Elie and his father were then separated from Elie's mother and beloved little sister, who was wearing a bright red coat. Both mother and 7-year-old child were sent straight to the gas chamber. Bernice and Hilda, the two older sisters, were then separated from Elie and his father. Due to pure luck, Elie and his father escaped the gas chambers by faking their ages and were sent to get their bodies tattooed with a prisoner number and were given light stripped clothing to wear. After seeing so many people being starved, tortured, and murdered around him, Elie became angry and frustrated hearing his father pray to God, as he began to feel as if God had betrayed them, and God was terrible for letting something like this happen to the Jewish people. After only a few days in the concentration camp, Elie begins to lose his confidence and fight in his body, likely due to the general mistreatment inside of Auschwitz. At one point, while Elie and his father are at the camp, Elie's dad is punched in front of Elie, and Elie barely even reacts. Elie later wrote about this experience, which I quote from the book Night. "My father had just been struck in front of me, and I had not even blinked. Only yesterday I would have dug my nails into the criminal's flesh." Page 39. Elie clearly would have fought to protect his dad and his honor in normal circumstances. However, he is now unable to react to violence, even to his own father's, after seeing all the traumatic events in the camp. Elie and his father suffered much traumatic abuse and starvation in the camp. Elie later admits he would have simply killed himself if it wasn't for his dad, as he didn't want his father to carry on in Auschwitz without him. There were multiple times in the book where Elie and his father would have frozen to death, starved, or just fell asleep and never woke up. But despite this, Elie remained alive, partly by pure chance, and partly because he wanted to protect his father, so he had a reason to live. I highly recommend you read the book Night by Elie himself, as it goes into great detail of what he and his father and many others faced in Auschwitz concentration camp. Eventually, despite trying to protect him for years, Elie's father became very sick, and was beaten often by other prisoners for wetting the bed and crying too loudly. Sadly, Elie's father was taken away to the chambers and died, leaving young Elie alone. Not long after his father's death, Elie's camp was liberated by American soldiers. Elie was taken to an orphanage where he was looked after, but remained extremely poor and depressed, and often thought about suicide. As time passed, he managed to go to a university and study psychology and learn to speak French. At 19, Elie became a journalist and began to start his career covering human rights abuses across the world. Elie always felt depressed and guilty after his time in the concentration camp, which continued for most of his life. For 10 years after the war, Elie refused to talk about his experience in this concentration camp, until a close friend of his named François Marcis, who encouraged him to speak about his memories. Elie later married his loving wife, Marianne Esther Rose, I hope I said that right, who also encouraged Elie to tell his harrowing story. As Elie began to publish stories about his life before and during the concentration camp, many of his writings were published across the world. Something amazing happened. Elie's older sisters, Bernice and Hilda, had survived the Holocaust, and later recognized their younger brother's writings. Elie's sisters reached out, and Elie and his sisters reunited after years of separation. Elie Wesiel passed away in 2016 in New York City, but his legacy continues to live on from his teachings of kindness and resilience. Elie always wanted others to speak up for one another. He also believed it was very important to speak up about human rights abuses when they were violated. Ironically, in 2016 was about the time the world started to become aware of China's re-education camps towards the minorities of China, mainly the Uyghurs, who are a native Chinese people of the area. The Chinese government and their leader, Xi Jinping, isolated the Uyghurs and Muslims and other Chinese minorities by monitoring everything the Uyghurs do. From the BBC article, "Who are the Uyghurs and why is China being accused of genocide?" I quote. I hope I'm saying all this correctly. I apologize if I do not pronounce these right. I am not trying to be racist. I just am not great at this. I'm sorry. Beijing, a place where a lot of Uyghurs live, is now covered by a pervasive network of surveillance, including police, checkpoints, and cameras that scan everything from number plates to individuals' faces. According to Human Rights Watch, police are also using mobile apps to monitor people's behavior, such as how much electricity they are using and how often they even use their front door. Since 2017, when President Xi Jinping issued an order saying all religions in China should be Chinese in orientation, there have been further crackdowns. Campaigners say China is trying to eradicate Uyghur culture. China denies allegations of human rights abuses in Beijing and says in 2019 that it has released everyone from its re-education camp system. Through testimony from the region suggests many are still detained and many were transferred from camps to formal prisons. China says the crackdown in Beijing is necessary to prevent terrorism and root Islamic extremists, and the camps are an effective tool for re-educating inmates in its fights against terrorism. It insists that the Uyghur militants are waging a violent campaign for an independent state by plotting bombing, sabotaging, and civil unrest, unexcused of exaggeration, the threat in order to justify repression against the Uyghurs. China has dismissed claims and is trying to reduce the Uyghur population through mass sterilization as baseless and says allegations of forced labor are completely fabricated. The few people who have escaped these camps mention horrible abuses of beatings, forced sterilization of women who are Uyghur, and extremely violent sexual abuse. Such abuse included guards picking young women they want to sexually assault, and then taking them to another room where they were assaulted by one guard or more. Some women were beaten or electrocuted with a rod that was often shoved up their genitals. Many women reported being badly bitten by guards who would leave bite mark scars on their skin. Some of these guards at re-education camps forced other women to restrain the others before sexual assault. One woman who mentioned this is Galzira Alikin, who had been detained in these camps for 18 months. Poor Galzira suffered much of the abuse mentioned and was forced to restrain women for the guards' pleasure. To this day, she is haunted by the memories of hearing women's screams from cells nearby where she slept, and seeing the mental trauma from those who were sexually assaulted, who would later turn to suicide or addiction. Tursane Ziawuddin was another prisoner of these camps, who was able to escape to the USA for a somewhat better life. She too suffered from all the abuse mentioned, and saw firsthand how her cellmate fell into addiction after being released from these re-education camps. China refuses to acknowledge these claims and for a while argued the obvious existence of the camps at all. I mean, just look at this video I'm about to show. Just a quick disclaimer, this is custody of the BBC and Guardian, and this is where the China senator just dances around the questions he's asked about a video showing blindfolded people led into a train. By the way, does that remind you of anything?
This is almost certainly over northern China, over Xinjiang. Can you tell us what is happening here?
I cannot see, this video. This is not the first time you show me. I still remember last year you showed me what is happening in Xinjiang.
In Xinjiang, exactly.
But let me tell you this. Xinjiang, have you been to Xinjiang yourself?
No, I never have.
You know, Xinjiang is regarded as the most beautiful place in Xinjiang. There's a Chinese saying, you do not know how big China is.
Ambassador, that is not beautiful coverage, however.
It's almost horribly comical how much they can't hide what these are, and that is concentration camps, something to ruin and destroy a generation, an entire race of people. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, many serious issues such as global warming and these camps have been pushed out of the media. This does not mean these camps still don't exist. This leaves the question, what can one do to shut down some of China's camps? It's hard to do anything, as it seems to be in the powers of the higher-ups of our government. However, there are a few small things we can do. The main reason little is done now is because China's government does not care about its citizens or minorities or human rights for that matter. The Chinese government is focused on economic gain. So, money. Many countries rely on China for economical reasons and physical items that we use every day. Many things people buy online from Amazon come from China. If we stand up to China's human rights abuses, then they could simply start taking away their economic influence from countries that call them out on their actions. However, China still needs major countries such as Canada, Europe, and the USA to keep their economic growth. It's a double-edged sword for both China and us. One thing that China does with detained Uyghurs is forcing them into labor camps. Does that remind you of anything? Where they make items that are used by different companies. Many of these items are made out of cotton, which the Uyghurs are forced to pick and then make into these items. Yet again, does that remind you of anything? These companies that tend to use cotton are usually clothing retailers. Some companies that have used forced Uyghur labor are Adidas, Calvin Klein, and H&M. In short, please don't buy from these companies. Another thing that can be done to influence your government to take more action on the ongoing crisis in China is to make human rights a priority. Not only will it make the Chinese government address the obvious genocide and actually be forced to do something about it after, but more things similar to what can be achieved once human rights are considered to be a main issue. So not only can we address China's human rights violations, but we can also address other countries if human rights issues are considered a priority. You can influence your government via talking about the re-education camps of China online or on social media and make a movement to show your governments this abuse will not be tolerated. It is understandable when you need to go to Amazon and get specific things that you can't find anywhere else. But when you can, shop local or secondhand and try to focus on getting most of your clothing, household items, or materials around you, instead of buying from companies that economically stimulate China's government. Not only will this help small businesses and to leave dents in China's economy, but it will also help the environment when you buy items or materials nearby, instead of ordering them from across the earth, which causes emission in this atmosphere during transport. The good news is we're doing more about China's concentration camps than we did when Elie and his father were trapped in Auschwitz. The USA, Canada, and Netherlands have called China out for the genocide that are the re-education camps for the Uyghurs of China. We have not really been doing a whole lot more since then, but this entire situation is a work in progress. Elie Wesiel was an amazing man who had a horrible but beautiful lesson to tell, and if he was alive today, he would be encouraging the earth to speak up about human rights abuses everywhere. To honor such an amazing person, I felt the need to make this video and dedicate it to his memory. I also wanted to make this video discussing the horrible abuses of China and at least contribute to the other louder voices of change, in the hopes to stop the concentration camps from continuing.